All right, more ladies, let's get these questions and answers for homework number 18. Homework number 18, number 1. A. On small farms, who did the work? Well, on small farms, planters and their families did all the work that was necessary to be done. That was on small farms. What kind of work? 1B. What 4 things needed to be done with the crops? So each year, the 4 things that needed to be done were, first off, the planting. So they had to get the fields ready to plant and plant the seeds. Then once they grew the crop, they had to harvest it. So that was number 2. The third would be, once you harvest the crop, you would have to store it somewhere until it was time to send it to the market. And number 4, you had to ship the crops to the market. So those were the 4 things that were done. Number 2A. What was the main job of the planter's family on a plantation? So on a small farm, the family did all the work. However, on a plantation, we're talking about a much, much bigger operation. So different than on a small farm, the main job of the planter's family on a plantation was to watch over the work of others. So we don't have it in our questions, but sometimes the plantation owners would hire overseers to also help with the watching over of the work being done. But most of the people watching over everyone were the family of the plantation owners. 2B. How did someone become an indentured servant? So an indentured servant was usually someone who, in those days, you could become an indentured servant in England if the English court sent you to the colony as punishment, the colonies as punishment to pay for your crimes, and so you'd have to work for a certain amount of time. Also, you could have just been kidnapped and sold in the colonies against your will. And so indentured servants were people who would work for a certain amount of time, and after a certain amount of time of working, they would pay off their debt, and they could become free again. 3A. So what was the difference between an indentured servant and a slave? Well, as I just mentioned, indentured servants could gain their freedom after a certain amount of time. Unfortunately, slaves could not gain their freedom. That was just not a part of the possibilities when you were a slave. As a matter of fact, 3B, how were slaves brought to the colonies? Well, we studied this a few weeks ago. They were kidnapped in Africa, and they were brought to the colonies against their will. We also talked about the ships on that horrible trip from Africa across the Atlantic Ocean, how cruelly they were treated just even on the ships. 3C, now how did plantation owners get the slaves? Well, unfortunately, slaves were treated like property. And so what happened was they would have what's called an auction, which is a public sale. And at these public sales, the plantation owners the planters would actually buy the slaves. 3D, what was decided about the children of slaves? Well, laws were passed that said children of enslaved people were also going to become slaves. And so, as horrible as that sounds, young children were also forced to be slaves as well. 4A, what were the 2 types of slaves? Well, first, there was the field hands, the field slaves who worked in the fields all day, very, very hard, difficult work. And the others were the house slaves who worked in the houses. 4B, what were the differences in their responsibilities? Well, as I began to mention, field slaves worked in the fields all day. Very, very difficult work. They would work from before sunrise to sunset. Meanwhile, the house slaves had it a little bit easier life. They took care of most of the household duties. For instance, the ladies, the female slaves would take care of a lot of the cooking and cleaning and clothes washing. Meanwhile, the men who were house slaves would take care of driving carriages, taking care of the horses for the men. A lot easier than working in the fields, but still they were slaves, and so that neither one was an enjoyable position to have. 5A. How were the... I'm trying to get back to where I was here. 5A. What determined how slaves were treated? Well, it all depended on the owners. It all depended on the plantation owners. If you had a good owner, then you were treated well. If you had a cruel owner, then you were treated horribly. 5B, if they were treated cruelly, what could slaves do? Well, that was the horrible part of it. There was really nothing that they could do. The only thing they could do was try to resist being beaten or being treated cruelly, or possibly even just try to escape. And if you were caught escaping, it was very bad punishment. 5C, what did slaves do at night after long hours of work? Well, in order to kind of keep their memories of their home lands, the slaves would tell stories and sing songs of their homelands. And finally, 5D, what were spirituals and how did they help slaves deal with their hardships? Well, spirituals were spiritual songs, were religious songs based on Bible stories. And these are the songs that the slaves sang to themselves to remember their beliefs in the Christian religion. It was one of the things that kind of kept them going. And so spirituals were religious songs based on Bible stories. Okay, so last video gave you the answers to homework 17. This was the answers to homework 18. On Monday, you are going to have a link on the announcement to go to our live session. Every class has a special schedule that day, and I have it in today's announcement. But I will give the answers to homework 19, and then you'll be ready for the test next week. The test will be posted next Tuesday, and you will have to take it before, I believe it's Thursday, and I'll double check that. So you don't have to take it on Tuesday, but it'll be posted Tuesday. It's going to be set up just like our quizzes have been. It's going to be a 15-question multiple choice portion and 2 questions that you have to answer in complete sentences. They're both going to be together in one quiz, or actually it'll be set up as a test, but it's just like the setups, just like the way that I have formatted the quizzes up until now. Okay, ladies, well, I will see you on Monday at the live session. In the meantime, get your answers corrected if you need to, and have a good weekend. Bye-bye.